Thanks, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about our students, and mostly about what they have to do to become students at our psychology program, and also why they have to do that. And that's what my PhD project is about. I've been working on it for the past 3.5 years at the Department of Psychometrics and Statistics. Yes. So first, there are some new rules when it comes to admission in the Netherlands that I would like to talk to you about. Before, we had programs that had a numerous fixes, so a fixed number of students that could be admitted, and they were admitted through lottery admission, but that is not the case anymore. Universities can now select the students in whichever way they want. And other programs that have open admissions, they have to have a matching procedure, so they can give advice to the students about their fit to the programs. So this is all new, and the question was how to do that. How do you select students for academic programs in higher education, and how do you assess their fit to the programs? And that is something that has been heavily debated in the past few years, also in the media. Everyone has an opinion about it, so it's a very interesting topic to study, I think. And the question is, do these new rules need new tools as well? That's the first question. And the aim of the tools we are going to use to select students is to predict their academic performance. At least that's what my goal is with it. Some people would argue that that's not what you want. You even want to predict their future job performance or even success in life, some people say. But we chose to keep it a little bit simpler for now and just predict academic performance because that is difficult enough as it is. And then you can look at the literature. How can you predict academic performance? And when you look there, you see that the best predictor is previous academic performance, like using high school grades. It's a very good predictor, only in practice it is very difficult to use because how are you going to compare the grades, for instance, from a student who came from Germany to a student who came from Dutch VWO level education? It's very difficult. And also, the Dutch government does not allow us to select students based on high school grades, so that option was out. And if you look further into the literature, there are also some other factors that can predict academic performance in higher education pretty well. For instance, non-cognitive factors. It's a collection for things like motivation, personality traits, and behavioral tendencies like procrastination. And if you use a combination of those factors, sometimes you can predict academic performance equally well as you can based on cognitive factors. So that's a very interesting thing to look at. That is also what many universities thought, and they use it a lot for selection, but also for matching procedures, specifically matching procedures. And what they do is they measure things like how motivated the students are or what their behavioral tendencies are using self-report questionnaires, because that's a very easy and efficient way to measure those traits. And the thing with self-report questionnaires is that when there are stakes, so when there is something desirable to be had based on the scores you get, people can fake their trait score, so they can make themselves look a little better than actually is justified. They can do that, and also our studies also found it, and other studies, they do it. When the stakes are high, people tend to fake, make themselves look better. And our research also showed that they not only do this in selection, so when the stakes are very high, but also in matching, when they only get an advice that is not binding, that they can ignore if they want, they still fake. Students still fake on these questionnaires. But then some people say, okay, we know that this occurs, this faking, but it's not really a problem. It just shows that the people who do that, who show that behavior, know what is expected from them, know how to behave, know what is desirable, and that's actually a good thing. So faking is not a problem at all. And actually there have been many people who argued like that and who said faking is just, it's a non-issue. We studied if that was the case by comparing the predictive validity of scores on many scales, self-report scales that measured many relevant traits that usually predict academic performance. And we compared the validity when those scales were completed in low stakes, so just for research purposes contexts, compared to high stakes, so selective admission context. And this was a within subjects design, so it was the same people and the same scales, just completed in different contexts. And what we saw was that when they completed the scales in low stakes contexts, just for research purposes, there were no consequences, and we looked at the predictive validity, that actually we found what would be expected based on the literature, and those are the green fields. They predicted academic performance pretty well, but when the same scales were completed in high stakes context, that's in blue, the prediction was either much lower or even vanished completely, and the scale scores did not predict academic performance anymore at all. So the thing is, yes, it's true that motivation and personality traits do predict academic performance in higher education, but we don't know how to measure them validly when the stakes are high or even medium. So that means that in this context, we cannot really use it, at least not using self-report questionnaires. So another option that we can cross from our list. So yes, we do need new tools actually for this context. And as a new tool, we looked at another approach, at the approach based on behavioral consistency. Usually psychologists look at signs as predictors of future performance or behavior, like they are like psychological constructs like intelligence and personality traits. But we chose to look at samples of relevant behavior, or in this case, samples of relevant performance on representative tasks. Actually, this happens a lot in personnel selection already. Maybe some of you know the work sample testing idea. It's similar and it's very successful in that context. And what we tried is, can we also apply that approach in educational selection? And we did that by studying something we call curriculum sampling tests. So actually it's very simple. What we did is we looked at our psychology program. What do you have to do to be a good psychology student? And we mimicked the study program in a representative task for the admission procedure. So we gave them representative study material, 2 chapters from the book, Introduction to Psychology, very representative for our program. And we told them, study this at home independently and come to the university and take an exam about it. Actually, kind of what we also would ask them to do if they were students already at our faculty. And then we went to see if this worked as an admission procedure. And when we look if it predicts future performance, actually it does pretty well. If we look at first-year retention, that's not dropping out. Correlations are a bit lower than for other criteria, between 0.20 and 0.30, but actually that's very impressive because retention is really notoriously difficult to predict. So we're finding something there, and that's good. And when we look at progress, like how many credits they got in the first year or what their mean grade was in the first year, the correlations between the scores on that simple test and those variables are between 0.40 and 0.50, which I think is quite impressive for just one exam. And for one cohort, I even followed them up to the end of their 3rd year, and the correlation between the score on the curriculum sampling test and the mean grade after 3 years is still 0.37, which is quite high for something so far apart, I would say. Another thing we studied was applicant perceptions, because we are actually selecting students and deciding if they can be admitted or not. They have to feel that that happens in a fair way. That was important. So we asked our students about different methods that they could be selected on and what they thought was desirable and fair. And curriculum sampling tests turned out that they thought that that was the most fair and most desirable method, together with interviews. They would like that very much, but considering our numbers, that would be a lot of work if we had to do that with all of them. So they thought it was very fair to use a curriculum sample, and we think that is because it is obviously relevant. When you are a student with us, you have to study material and take exams. That is also what you have to do to get admitted. So it's very obvious why it's relevant, those scores. And then when I talk about these things with people. Very often someone comes up with the argument, yeah, I'm sure, nice, all those correlations, but I know someone who, and then usually it follows something like, I know someone who did very bad on that test, but he's now an honor student. Examples like that come up a lot. Or as one reviewer of our papers once said, he actually put it in caps lock. I didn't do that here. He said, a correlation of 0.5 is not high, because you're only explaining 25% of the variance in your outcome, and that's not a lot. A lot is left unexplained. Yes, that is true, but Robin Dawes, I really recommend reading the whole paper if you have some time left anytime soon, actually gave a very nice argument against these reasonings. He says, what are we actually doing? We are trying to predict the performance or behavior of very young people further away in time. That is a very difficult task. Why are we assuming that we can predict all of the variance? Maybe we should be more humble and say 25% of the variance, given the complexity of the situation, is very impressive. And I actually agree with that reasoning. So I think we should be humble and we should not expect that we can predict performance perfectly, but we should do it the best we can. Thank you.